describes his effort to tell the American story in all of its complexity through documentary filmmaking. I'd like you to welcome Ken Burns.
It doesn't get any better than the American Revolution, and it doesn't get any more complicated.
Thank you. Welcome back to New York.
Thank you.
I put a picture of the Brooklyn Bridge up.
Thank you.
The subject of your 1981 film. What's it like for young Ken Burns to be working on that project?
Well, I looked 12. Everybody I was trying to raise money from, it's all PBS, so we were trying to get underwriting. They just said, this child is trying to sell me the Brooklyn Bridge. No. And Josh, for many years, I had 2 gigantic 3-ring binders, each filled with at least 150 rejection letters that I kept on my desk, just as the reminder of how hard it is. There are probably people with a lot more talent than I have, but didn't have the sort of perseverance to see it through. But I had read David McCullough's book, The Great Bridge, decided that we should do an hour film, and people had an hour film on the bridge. No way. It should be 10 minutes. And I said, I don't know how I can keep it to an hour. And now, of course, I couldn't tie my shoe on film in an hour. And half of it would be the construction, and half of it would be the life of the bridge as a symbol of strength, vitality, ingenuity, and promise, as I put in one of those endless letters trying to raise $500 here or $1,000 there or whatever. In fact, Meade Esposito, the Democratic Brooklyn boss of Kings County Democratic Committee, called me up to his 2nd or 3rd floor office on Montague Street to hand me an envelope, not with cash, but with a check. This is a man who died in jail, by the way, for corruption. But he said, nobody's making a film about my bridge. What if I don't have some money in it?
Amazing. As I put this picture up of the Statue of Liberty. That's the subject of your 1985 film. When it was reviewed by Walter Goodman of the New York Times, he wrote, "It is a portrait not only of a monument, but of an idea, refracted through the lives of immigrants who first saw America through her silhouette." In the 40 years since this film went on PBS, where are we in the story of both this monument, but more immigration as a whole?
We're in a little bit of a trough, but I think we all know that we're all, unless Native Americans, immigrants, and this used to be a Native American land. The interesting thing is how it's gone in waves. In this film, I found myself figuring I'd go to everybody and ask them what they thought liberty meant. And I would get from most people who'd been here a generation or two, liberty means, freedom. And then all of a sudden, we abandoned that and started speaking to immigrants, writers and artists, but ordinary people. Went out to Brighton Beach in Brooklyn and talked to people. We've gone in waves. From 1870 to 1920, we let everybody in. There was a huge backlash. By 1924, we'd passed the Johnson-Reed Immigration Act that just cut it off, except high quotas from people from Northern Europe, Protestant. We didn't want Catholic or Southern European, certainly didn't want Jews or any Asians or whatever. And so we've wrestled with the kind of country we think we are and the kind of country we actually are. By the mid-60s, we'd reformed that act, began to bring in others, but we'd also destabilized with that new act how we'd let in people from Latin and South America, particularly Mexico and Central America, who could come and go as they pleased based on agricultural cycles. And by destabilizing that, we've also contributed to the problem now. And then, of course, it gets politicized, in which, though immigrants, it's been proven over and over again, commit far less crimes than the rest of us do, they are nonetheless tagged with their crimes and become the victims of it and used as an excuse for the law. So as someone who has studied immigration from the very beginning, and my goodness, what is the American Revolution but the study of English and German and Irish and Scottish and Welsh immigration and all of the growing pains that suggested? Benjamin Franklin in Pennsylvania was worried about an influx of what he called swarthy Germans, and wished that Pennsylvania could remain the lovely white and red that it was. That just begins to tell you the complexity of what it is. My theory, and I won't hit this too much longer and waste your time, I've had the privilege of making films about the US, but I also make films about us. And the one thing I've learned is that there's only us and there's no them. And whenever we create a them, we get in trouble.
If your 1994 film Baseball has any resonance today, I want to just read a quote from George F. Will from that series. And he said on your show, "Baseball suits the character of this democratic nation. Democracy is government by persuasion. That requires patience. Baseball is a game of the long season where small incremental differences decide who wins and loses." In the 31 years since George Will told you that, where are we on the trajectory of the evolution of that sport and the evolution of our democracy?
Well, I think the sport has never been better. I think the product on the field is as good as it's ever been. Remember that we have the great Willie Mays catch, Vic Wertz's what's sure inside the park home run, certainly a triple in the 1954 World Series, and he catches it and almost doubles the guy off at first, and it's one of those amazing things, but that's because they filmed the World Series. Now you can get almost every week something that approaches that kind of catch because every single moment of every single game is played, and you can prove to people who are skeptics and are of the, oh, they don't play it the way they used to when I was a boy. In fact, I have a quote in the baseball series, episode 1, Pete O'Brien, 1858 says, "You know, they don't play baseball the way they used to when I was a boy." I don't mean that the rules aren't the same, it's just, it's not the same spirit. So we've been complaining about the death of this most perfect of games. Don't get me wrong, I love football, I love basketball, I love these sports, but nothing comes close to this. And it's the only sport that accompanies nearly every generation of our national narrative. And so I think we ebb and flow. If you want to study immigration, your previous question, you can study baseball, because it's first English, then Irish superstars, then German, then Italian and Jewish and belatedly African American and Hispanic and Asian, which is the arc of the principal immigration in the United States.
And George Will's equation of the incremental movements and the incremental wins and losses as it relates to our democracy, we're moving we have bigger pendulum shifts.
Yeah, and we've lost that patience that we think we all want it, the things we digest. You know, in the same series, George Will said that football has two of the worst characteristics of American society: violence, punctuated by frequent committee meetings. And baseball, and there's George Carlin's great routine about a gridiron, you throw a bomb in the end zone, you blitz your enemy, and all of this sort of stuff. In baseball, you come home. You play it in a park, and you come home. That's the purpose of the game, to come home. So I think that, when we get too far away from the spirit of that, and what's so great is how a game which looked really, on oxygen during COVID has put a spectacular game on the field this year.
So now we come to the American Revolution. There was an article last week in the New York Times in which you said to David Leonhardt, "Democracy is not an intention of the revolution, it's a byproduct, it's a consequence, perhaps even an unintended consequence of it." At what point during your dive into the American Revolution did you begin to move away from what we're taught in grade school about taxation without representation and think of it more as this radical thing, as you described?
Well, it is very much about taxation and representation, and I would add an important dimension ahead of that as the main cause, which is Native American land. So the Brits have won the French and Indian War, which the rest of the world calls the 7 Years' War, which is the third global war over the prize of North America. Prize means, particularly in an English society based on John Locke's idea of life, liberty, and property, essential that there's ownership. And one of the reasons there are many loyalists, particularly in this area, but all up and down the 13 colonies, is because they have owned land for the first time ever. Their families back in England or Wales or Scotland or Ireland have worked as dependent labor for 1,000 years on land. So they have land, they have prosperity, they're in the best system of government on earth so far, the British constitutional monarchy, and they see no reason to change. But the French and Indian War has drained the treasury. The British in 1763 said you can't go over the Appalachians, we can't protect you, we don't have the funds to protect you, and by the way, our treasury is so depleted we're also going to tax you in various ways. And all of this, and the way they treated the Catholic citizens of Quebec, which they had got as part of the prize of winning this war, and many other things caused what took 20 years to develop, but of course began on April 19th, on the morning of April 19th, 1775 at Lexington Green, where the chances of the success of the rebellion were zero. And then 6.5 years later in Yorktown, it's 100%. And it's really curious to understand that. So I think what you want to do is you have to accept, for large measure, because there are no photographs and no newsreels, that it's going to feel distant to us. We're sure that those people are different than the way we are right now, and they're not. They're having sophisticated conversations the way we have, maybe even more so if they're dreaming up this completely new idea in the history of the earth. And that's the important thing. I've called the American Revolution the most important event in world history since the birth of Christ, and I mean that, and I'm willing to, to defend that position if necessary. If you think of that, the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, says there's nothing new under the sun, suggesting human nature doesn't change, which it doesn't. And the same degrees of venality and virtue and generosity and greed obtain here now as they did back then. And we can describe that all in this film, and you'll see it all in this film. But for a second, something was different. We'd recreated. Thomas Paine said, not since the time of Noah do we have a chance to make things different again. And we, for the first time, everyone heretofore were subjects, and now there were citizens with all the attendant responsibilities, including the pursuit of happiness is not as we would assume and argue about that inscrutable. All the founders meant lifelong learning, as Catherine was saying, in a marketplace of ideas, rather than the acquisition of stuff in a marketplace of things. That was what it was, because in order to be virtuous, to earn the right of citizenship, you had to be educated, and that education had to be constant. And so things like democracy kind of slip in for lots of very, very interesting reasons, but it's mostly this idea that we created, this experiment that then traveled around the world and has been, as I say, the second sentence of the Declaration is the second best sentence in the English language after I love you, And so it doesn't get any better than the American Revolution, and it doesn't get any more complicated than the American Revolution. And unfortunately, the distance in time, the absence of photographs and things like that, our desire to protect those big ideas, thinking that if we really pointed out that this was a bloody civil war, it would diminish them. It does not in any way diminish them. It actually makes them more inspiring. These ideas are at the heart of the human aspiration, and how great it is to be from a country that originally thought that idea up and is still trying to figure out ways to practice it and extend it.
The heart of the human aspiration. Those of you who've seen this 7-part HBO series, John Adams, will recognize Paul Giamatti revoicing that character. I think it's Claire Danes as Abigail Adams.
That's correct.
And we also see another Ken Burns signature moment as the great Rick Atkinson, Maya Jasanoff, Christopher Brown, and many others appear in your film, and you talked about this exhaustive casting process. How does the process go? Do you research and write first? Do you go out and do interviews with the historians that you're interested in first and say, what do we got here, and then put it on a storyboard?
Yes. No, there are no storyboards. We never stop writing, we never stop researching, we never stop interviewing, we never stop shooting. And so we're interviewing scholars and learning, and we're reading their books, we're reading other people's books, we're writing, we're correcting. The scholars come in at 10 different junctures to look at stuff, first drafts of script, and make comments, and we include what we feel is right, obviously getting things right. We don't so much cast as we have people come in and read a variety of voices, and then we say, boy, this might be a good George Washington, as Josh Brolin is, or that Matthew Rhys is a good Thomas Paine, an Englishman whose writings form every single one of our titles of the 6 episodes is from a Thomas Paine quote, in order to be free here from that quote at the very beginning that you hear Matthew Rhys do it. John Proudstar is the voice of Conestoga, the spokesman for the 6 nations, never fall out one with another. We've got a powerful union, never fall out one with another. And Franklin takes this and says, why can't we do this? It's pretty spectacular, but we have probably the best cast, I think, that has ever been assembled. Maybe you could go to The Longest Day and give me an argument, the great story, but we have many more stars reading off camera, Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, and the ones you mentioned, and Samuel L. Jackson and Morgan Freeman and Laura Linney, who was Abigail Adams with Paul before, and Jeff Daniels, Sir Kenneth Branagh, Liev Schreiber, Damian Lewis, Domhnall Gleeson, Hugh Dancy, LaTanya Richardson. We're just, it is pretty spectacular, and they happy to read for us, and they do such an extraordinary job making these people real and dimensional, and sometimes it's just ordinary stuff. John writing to Abigail about how Philadelphia is laid out. And then another time it might be him talking about the millions yet unborn. He's talking about us, about you and me. That's us, that he understands the posterity that they're working towards. It's pretty inspirational. And then we're introducing you, as I said before, to scores of people you've never heard of. There's a 14-year-old kid from Boston named John Greenwood who joins the Patriot Cause. A 15-year-old named Joseph Plum Martin who joins the Patriot Cause from Connecticut. There's a 10-year-old Betsy Ambler, read by Maya Hawke, whose dad Ethan is also in it, along with Michael Keaton and others that play generals off camera. And Betsy Ambler is her name, is 10 years old when the war begins, and she is asked after the war by a young sister who was born during the revolution, I don't remember anything, what happened? So she sat down and wrote her sister this extraordinary memoir that we have, and we just gave voice to it. And that allows us to have we have the wife of a German general who's fighting at Saratoga, and she's delayed her passage so that her third and final daughter can be born, and she comes over in this dangerous passage, incredibly worried, because she's heard that Americans eat cats. If our film had come out last fall, that might have been a real, a dramatic thing. I think it'll pass by, because we don't point at any of these rhymes that take place, because we began this 10 years ago. You can imagine all the rhymes we've gone through, but these voices help bring to life what is this amazing story, bottom up as well as top down.
I want to open it up to questions. I have more for Ken, but if anyone in the room wants to reflect on what you've already seen of the American Revolution or other things in the Ken Burns Over, I want to open it up to our colleagues for Slice of Citadel.
Ken, thank you for being here, first of all. It feels like today we hear so much about kind of how divided America is, and you've done such an incredible job of bringing to life so many of the symbols and the moments that really define the American experience. What are we missing today, and how can we kind of focus back on all that we have?
It's a good point. I'd like to say that being engaged in history makes you kind of optimistic, because we're really divided now. Like, we think it was just an argument with the British, and we're fighting the British army that they send over to enslave us. That's the word they use. But we're fighting loyalists. We're fighting a population almost as great as our own. New York is a huge loyalist stronghold, and becomes, when it falls to the British in September 15th, 1776, it's not going to be in American hands again for 7 years and 2 months. More than 7 years and 2 months, till November 25th, Evacuation Day, 1783, 2 years and a month after Yorktown. We're really divided. We're divided in the Civil War. We're divided at almost every period that I've ever looked at. I think what we lack right now is the ability to see that kind of aerial view, the drone view of that Washington's seeing it, and to understand how to be citizens now that we're all independent free agents, right? We're all independent free agents. And there's nothing that we really do. It's called social media, and it's not. You only have to go into a room of people who are all on their phones to know that it's the opposite of social. It's actually disconnecting people from real experiences. And so I think one of the things that happen when someone is disturbed or having a difficult time intimately, now not talking about nations, but talking about an individual, they go to their pastor or a professional. And one of the things they'll start asking is, where did you come from? Who are your parents? What was your childhood like? You go back to your origin story and you begin to reconstruct, not for the benefit of the pastor or the professional, but for the person, the origin story. I think it's really good that this is coming out, well in advance of next July 4th, when the potential for being drowned not only in fife and drum treacle, but also in arguments that are trying to argue today's points instead of understanding the complexity of this moment. It gives us a chance to have a more sophisticated conversation about what it is we actually believe. This attempt to avoid authoritarianism, the idea of investing, the Constitution begins, Article 1 is about the legislature. I mean, like, the fact that this is the greatest constitution ever written, the shortest constitution, 4 pieces of parchment paper written at the end of the 18th century that's able to adjudicate our complicated problems now, and not everybody said the legislature is Article 1. That meant, you know, if the founders came back here, everybody would say they'd be so upset. They would be not upset that somebody was seeking more power in the executive. They'd be upset that the Congress had acquiesced. That the legislative branch had given up and ceded to the executive that power. This is the conservative historian Yuval Levin's sort of great thesis right now. And we had the privilege, as I said, of being with him last week in Philadelphia, and it was sort of stunning to realize how much we all share in common, this legacy, and it's possible, I think, to rebuild. Harry Truman is supposed to have said, the only thing that's really new is the history you don't know. And I think with regard to our own sets of problems, however serious or existentially threatening they may be, the answer and the solution will be reinvesting in the original ideals, because these people had a great idea. And it's obviously, they were flawed in many ways and didn't extend it to everyone, but we've done that work. And now the question is to see the extent to which that model is such a pole star, as Rick Atkinson says in the last waning seconds of the film, a pole star that we understand the gift they've given and our obligation to ourselves and our children and our children's children, our posterity, to leave it for them so that we can say the unborn millions, you know, those millions yet unborn that could benefit from this system. It's the central question of right now, and I think investing in our origin story will be really good work that everybody can do.
What is the research process? How do you even begin to plan for it or deploy your team, and how huge is the team?
It's not that huge, it's tiny. It's maybe 23 people handmade this film. We thank correctly hundreds of people in the credits, but it's really kind of handmade. The thing is what I was saying to Josh, is that we don't sort of separate it. Like a traditional film company might be a certain period of research, say 3 weeks, 3 months, followed by a certain period of writing, 3 weeks, 3 months, that produces a script that informs the shooting, and then the editing, boom, done. We never stop researching. We never stop shooting. And we never stopped writing. And so you would presume that making a film would be like building a skyscraper, additive, right? It's not, it's subtractive. I come from New Hampshire. We make maple syrup there. It takes 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of maple syrup. So we have been shooting for years and years and years, collecting not only the critical mass of the footage of people reenacting, in that impressionistic way you've already seen, or been there at Independence Hall early in the morning where the Park Service gave us unusual access to be able to use our dollies and to use all the sorts of equipment we needed to make it come alive, but also entering into our system thousands and thousands of paintings and drawings and documents and maps that are hugely important to the story that we're telling. And then it's sort of like cooking it the way you would maple syrup. You can't boil it, then you have rock candy. But you keep it under boiling, and over time, with patience, you get to a place where something comes together. And it might mean giving up favorite scenes. It might mean at the last moment finding out a new piece of information that changes it. It might just be a gut, a small feeling, a small weak voice saying, you know, that quote of Thomas Paine that's in the middle of the introduction, wouldn't it be better if it opened the film? And that's what happened. We'd already locked it. And Sarah Botstein, my co-director, and I, we moved it. I called her up one day and I said, I'm worried about the intro. She goes, me too. And everybody thought it was perfect, done, tied it up in a bow. And we went in and so destabilized, and with the help of our editor, Tricia Reedy, just remade it. So we got rid of a lot of narration that felt everybody was going, well, that's too important to lose. But we replaced it with more active stuff. You see a black hand on a musket? Do you need then to be told that they're black troops? You can find out about that later when it catches up. This is the overture. You then see a woman at night with a lantern. She carries it. All of a sudden, you're with some troops at night that are reviewing, and John Adams's voice comes out. We're in the midst of a remarkable revolution, the first of its kind in the history of nations, and the fate of people yet unborn and now before us. All of these are minor adjustments we're making. The last 2 months of editing, it's usually just me and the editors, and I'm saying, open up or close down 2 frames, which is 1/12 of a second. And we're making that adjustment within the quote, 6 or 7 times within that first quote by Thomas Paine. The point is about patience and trusting the process. It's like building a superhighway. You're going to cut down trees and they're going to be boulders, and if you expect to go 75 miles an hour right away, you're mistaken. But eventually you can get to that place by polishing this thing. And I don't know of any more exhilarating process that I've been involved in my entire life, personal or private, that has the kinds of satisfactions that you get from making a good decision. And sometimes the decision you make on a Tuesday evening, you go in on Wednesday morning and said, what idiot thought that might work? And then you change it again. But you have the luxury, and working in public broadcasting has given us the ability to say that each one of these is our director's cut. That we can spend 10 years, nearly 10 years, from conception to completion on a project like this, and to get it right. No other place they might give me the money like that. I wouldn't have to spend all the time collecting from all the various generous people, including Ken Griffin. So that is part of the great social story of this. But I could have walked into a streaming service or a premium cable and gotten all the money I needed to make, say, the Vietnam War film that cost $30 million and took 10 and a half years to make, 10 of which I was out with my tin cup. Now, wouldn't it be nice to spend a half an hour sell and have all the money? It would be really great if they gave you 10 and a half years, but they'd give you a year and a half. And I can't make a film that, one of the other things that Catherine neglected to say in terms of these shared experiences, today is a school day in America, and about half of my films have been shown, some of them hundreds of times, the Civil War series, hundreds of times in classrooms all across the country, today, as it was yesterday, also a school day, as it will tomorrow. And public television is uniquely designed so that we can reach every classroom in the country. And part of what we've done for this is develop really robust educational materials for 3rd, 5th, 8th, 11th, and college grades and college. And we're really, we're proud of the work, and this is all secondary, but the idea that this lives on, that the Civil War series that you were talking about with this defunct packaging, can I talk about that in 1 second? That it lives 35 years later in classrooms and does something. So defunct because this is a VHS, as Josh was saying, from the early 90s, one of the first issued. This flag, which we call the Confederate flag, is not the flag of the Confederacy. That is a different flag. This is one flag of the Army of Northern Virginia. That's Robert E. Lee's. It's a battle flag of it. And the only reason why it's on this cover is it became in prominent use to represent the Confederacy, not the actual flag of the Confederacy. And the people who brought it into use were the Ku Klux Klan, our own homegrown Al-Qaeda or ISIS. In their night raids, they would fly this particular flag. And as soon as we realized it, we have the cannon silhouette in the new packaging, because this doesn't cut it. It's not politically correct. It's just not correct. Do we want to fly the black flag of ISIS? The flag is called the Stars and Bars. It's got stars, it's got some bars. It has no cross like that. And it was only because that was the flag that the Ku Klux Klan chose that it developed in the years after the Civil War during Reconstruction, and the collapse of Reconstruction, that it came into use.
Thank you, Ken. One more question. Yes, sir.
So you mentioned that you would say that the American Revolution was the most important event since the birth of Christ. I guess I'm just curious why you would give that primacy over, let's say, like John Pym and Oliver Cromwell in the English Civil War, where they checked King Charles' power.
Yeah, it's a good, that would certainly be in the list of the top 10 or 20. Gutenberg's printing press, the collected works of William Shakespeare, Bach, right? I mean, you don't have to limit it to political events, but you brought up a political event. So this set in motion, would you argue, the greatest country on earth?
Yes.
That this revolution, an anti-colonial revolution, by the way, we're the original anti-colonialists, set in motion more than 200 years of revolutions all across the world, using as the primacy of that in a way that what happened with Cromwell and earlier moments of incremental, this was a quantum leap from those things. So I think I feel very comfortable in saying the most important event, because if it created us, then it's It's got to be important, not just those Brits. No, I'm just teasing you. It's a really good question, and I want to have that conversation because there are a set of antecedents to the American Revolution, as we're just seeing. Look at that last scene. I had said before about John Locke in Life, Liberty, and Property, but that's what John Adams is arguing for. Why, with someone who doesn't have a farthing, have the same rights as me, right? So that means we're going to the polling booth here, and you got to pull out your tax returns, right? What? You only made that? Sorry. What? You don't own property? So the revolution, which was intended essentially by the John Adamses of the world to be exactly that. I'm sorry, you don't get a vote. Come back to me when you've got a successful business and you own some property, is not that. And that kind of evolution that takes place on the ground, improvising as we go along. Because George Washington doesn't win with those hardy militia men. They run off. They're scared. They have crops to plant and then crops to sow. You know who stays? Teenagers like John Greenwood and Joseph Plum Martin, ne'er-do-wells, second and third sons without a chance of an inheritance of property, recent immigrants, obviously without anything. They're the ones who do the fighting. That's the Continental Army. And basically, a war to protect the rights of property owners is fought largely by people who own no property at all.
Ken Burns, 1981, the Brooklyn Bridge, 2025, the American Revolution. For those 45 years, an American treasure, and still many more treasures to give us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.